Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Alan Kearns. I want to welcome you to our Career Class series. This is fourth in our Career Class series, Career Class 401 on Leadership Starts With You, or as we've subtitled it, Why Should I Follow You? Which is a question that everyone really is asking about leaders is fundamentally, what is it about you that why should I follow you, and what do you bring to the table, and why you? And so I'm going to be sharing with you some of my observations about leadership and how to be a more effective leader, and elements around this discussion on one of the most important things. It's sort of interesting in the work we do. We do three things in CareerJoy, both with organizations and with individuals. And we're often working with what is the right career, and the second question often we're working with is how do I get the right career? And the third question we're often working with is, how do I advance in the right career? So the whole, how to maximize my career path. And then the fourth question we work with is really this question is, I'm a leader. How do I be a more effective leader? So my background is I've spent a number of years in the recruitment industry. In fact, I was originally educated as an optician and made a transition into the recruitment industry. And so I come at this having made a transition, but also working the last 20 years, working with organizations and with individuals on career management issues, on leadership development issues. I do a lot of writing and speaking around this topic. We do workshops for organizations. So so this is what I'm going to be talking about today is a very applied perspective. And hopefully helping you to sort of see things slightly differently, slightly more accurately. So this goes back to my original education, which is really your ability to maybe focus differently and see things differently as a leader and get some clarity. Some technical things just from today. You'll notice on your dashboard there's a couple of different ways of participating in today's webinar, and one of the ways is you'll notice that you can have a hands up. So one of the things we do just to moderate this more effectively, because we have a good turnout as we do today, is we try to moderate the quality of the audio. One of the ways we do that is by muting everyone. So, but one way you can participate in today's webinar is to give me a hands up, just to make sure that you can hear everything. And so if you just want to take a minute just to give me a hands up, just so I can make sure that you can hear everything fine, and okay, great, terrific, and as well as see the screen. Also, another way to participate is you can connect with me through LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, if you're not connected to me, but LinkedIn, you can connect with me in my network that way, and that's a good way to get connected with me. If you're not connected with me, is through LinkedIn, and my email is alan, ALAN, @careerjoy.com. So that's a super secret email to connect with you that way, and as well as on Twitter. So on Twitter. You can also follow me on Twitter at CareerJoy. Also on our site there's many resources. So you're probably having this question today is, what is it to be an effective leader? What does that look like? And it's interesting, the work we do on leadership practice, so we have really two sides of our practice. One is with individuals, helping individuals in career management issues, and the other area we get involved with is with organizations. We have many organizations, some of them represented here, that we work with, and we actually do leadership development, leadership coaching, and so I want to bring that perspective of, what's interesting is people work for people, they don't work for organizations. I mean, you have to be housed in an organization, but really, you're working for people, right? People work for people. The other interesting thing is we also have a number of organizations that recommend us to their alumni for support. And so if you're part of these groups, we typically work with a well-educated Canadian professional who's thinking through this and wondering about that and how to manage that. And as I look at this, leadership and career management in general are really literacy issues. If I look at why do people go to university, as I mentioned, some of our university relationships, people go to university to raise their literacy rate, around finance, around leadership, whatever it might be. And really, Terry O'Reilly's work in this area of, he talks about this concept, which a few years ago on one of our webinars he joined us, and he talks about this idea of literacy, and that's his role in helping people understand literacy as it relates to marketing, and I really see this as literacy as it relates to leadership. Now, why does leadership matter? Well, I think it matters for a few reasons. And maybe I'll start with two good examples of where I think where leadership matters and its impact. So obviously two very well-known Canadian brands. One is Eaton's and one is now, I guess, BlackBerry, co-founder RIM. Both profoundly innovative leaders, certainly in our country, but in RIM's case, globally, in the whole area of technology, and really the originator of the smartphone. And Eaton's, if you think about it, Eaton's was Amazon 1.0. Think about 100 years ago, and this is the catalog from 100 years ago. This is the cover of the catalog from 1913, and they had this amazing technology where you could order thousands of items and it would be delivered to your doorstep. So that was called a catalog, and distribution and logistics, and they had all of that set up. And why is it at 100 years later that Eaton's is no longer? It was, more ubiquitous, if you can imagine, than Tim Hortons or RIM or everything combined together in our country, to essentially no longer here. Why is that? It's leadership. And RIM, it's again the creator of the smartphone category essentially. And why have they moved from number 1 in the category to number 4 and following? Leadership. And to me, what I want to talk about today, the difference between being smart about leadership and sometimes being afraid of leadership, or leadership can be scary. And two good examples of this very practically. Because probably you're not running a billion-dollar business, and maybe the Eaton's and RIM metaphor works for you in a way. But let me share with you an example of where I've seen leadership. Another example of leadership, starting with you, is recently I was in Vancouver, Victoria, actually, in the fall of last year, speaking at a conference, and I had this gentleman pick me up, really nice, cab driver, and we had a nice conversation. A relatively young man in his 20s, very pleasant. The cab was clean, got me to my destination, and wished me a nice night, and that was about it. And I got what I needed to be done, and away we went, right? And then here's a text I have from another example of a gentleman who picked me up in a cab, and I was in Halifax, and I was speaking at a conference. And this particular gentleman picked me up at the airport, and what he asked me was interesting. We had this nice conversation, and as we're getting closer to the Westin where I was staying, he asked me this question. He said, when are you flying back? And I said, well, I'm flying back on Friday. And he asked me the question of, what, do you have a ride? Somebody picking you up on Friday? I said, no, I don't. And he said, would you like me to pick you up on Friday morning? And I said, that would be great. And so he said, okay, great. And what he did is he opened up he had a calendar in a book with his calendar in it, and he opened it up and he penciled me in. And I also noticed that I wasn't the only name on his calendar that day. There were a number of names on there. And he said, "Oh, do you mind, Alan, if I grabbed your phone number just to make sure I have everything set up?" And he said, "No, not at all." And this is a text that he sent me 24 hours on the Thursday. He sent this to me, or I guess the morning of the previous day, 24 hours before. And he sent me a text, and he asked, confirming everything for the next day and setting everything up. And then he picked me up that next morning and got me to the airport, and everything was fine. Now, this gentleman was, I'd say, in his 50s. He had been a taxi driver or a limo driver for a long time, a lot of experience. And what was interesting is, he was showing leadership, really. And he was leading me. And in this gentleman's case, young man, interesting enough, younger, and you think of technology, didn't use any of those things. He was letting circumstances lead. He was letting the economy, the market. And I asked him, I said, well, what's your day going to be like? And he said, well, it kind of depends. And I said, it depends. If I'm lucky, I'll get some good fares today. And if I'm not so lucky, well, it'll be a quiet day for me. And so it's interesting how one person was letting luck and momentum and circumstances determine their success. And this gentleman was really showing leadership. And that's really the fundamental difference. Really, and that's what I want to share today, is really the difference between luck and leading. And that leaders, take advantage of and really are intentional about where they want to go, and they will lead you. And people are silently looking to be led, and they want to be helped, and the whole world is looking for that. Barack Obama, really, played into that, and in him getting the biggest job in the world is he showed people, here, follow me, and people are looking for leadership. Now, it's interesting looking at the definition of leadership, and this is from Wikipedia, and it means to cause to go with one, to lead, and it means to be in first place, and it means to be in front or leading place. And there's some examples of that in the leading hand in journalism, in theater, and in jazz, right? So it's the lead player. And the leader sets the tone. The leader sort of lays out, this is where we're going, and people will follow you and will model you. And and this is particularly important today. Why is it so important today? Well, it's interesting thinking about the example of RIM and BlackBerry, or sorry, RIM and Eaton's. In RIM's time, in our time, basically, things happen really, really quickly, and there's constantly a very dynamic world we live in. And I've been in the HR field for 20-odd years, and at times you'd see different sectors go through different transformation. And now what you see is, sectors all over the place are being transformed on a continual basis and very, very quickly. And in Eaton's case, transformation and change happen in a very slow, much more slower mode. People used to go to Europe on a boat, right, and be away for a month on a boat, just going someplace, right? But that's not the world we live in today. The world we live in today is full of what I call economic recession. What do I mean by that? Well, there's tremendous changes. You're seeing this in the stock market. You're seeing where there's much more unpredictable elements and much more variables to things doing well and not so well. You're seeing this in globalization. You're seeing countries show leadership. And, think of China and India, two great examples of, and again, you may not agree with all the things they're doing as countries, but you have to give them credit for showing leadership. Even more effectively than the West in many ways. And you're seeing this in their countries, which they're looking no longer to be just leaders in manufacture, but they're looking to be leaders in medicine and in all kinds of things that at a higher level, right? So globalization is shifting things. The whole technology industry is shifting things. It's interesting. I saw another interesting way that leadership's shifting is in the use of human resources. That Manpower, or Kelly rather, is the second largest employer in the United States right now. So the second largest employer is a temporary labor. So again, that's changing things, right? So again, that the way people are working at work, the way things are being managed is relative to that. Same with technology, the use of technology, the 24/7, the fact that a smartphone, it can give me information. I was listening to an interview of how banks are using smartphones to reduce the amount of people having to come into their environments and to make it easier for us to do transactions. And the 24 by nature, sector, the fact that we can do work 24 by nature. There's also, creating technology challenges for leaders. So the fact that most of us are no longer working in a 9-to-5 environment, we're working in a 24/7 environment. I can think of the time in the early 90s in Ontario where there was a discussion about Sunday shopping, and now that seems relatively foolish right now. Right? Sunday shopping, Another place, by the way, globalization plays is in competition, in the sense of, that competition is one thing, but also as a leader, if you look at what you want to be thinking about is, can you get some global experience? It's interesting. One of my clients was just in, and this person's from the financial industry, and had spent some time working in China in the investment banking world. So again, one of the things you want to be very cognizant about is getting some international experience and some international exposure to really understand that. Same thing with another area as a leader you need to be thinking about is, and we talked about the use of contractors and temporary labor, but also the multi-generational workforce. And the fact that probably you're going to be working longer. This is a very interesting stat from the Globe and Mail showing that in 2009, 55% of people imagine retiring at the age of 66, and that had dropped to 27% in 2012. Now, what's interesting about that is that it was driven actually more by enjoyment and to be mentally active than it was necessarily money. But the fact that we're working in a multi-generational workforce, and that both as an employer and as a leader, understanding the difference between what motivates multi-generational workforces, as well as you yourself, the ability, if you lead yourself, to have a very long type of career in whatever you do. Same thing. The other thing that changes is the way people are being promoted, and the fact that you can be promoted much sooner as leaders today. It's not unusual, again, to see a Fortune 500 company with a 50-year-old CEO, which is, again, a change. And the way being promoted and the way that organizations are bringing in leaders from different dimensions and from different competitors, again, a change in the way people are going. Also, competition. Leaders, another area you're seeing is in leadership, why leadership is important is the reality that there's so many choices out there, and that great brands lead the consumers and lead the marketplace and differentiate themselves and have the ability to present and market themselves in an effective way. And so what are some of the impacts of leadership? Well, why leadership, another reason it's important as well, is if you look at people's, where career and finance come into people's quality of life. And again, if you can provide a really good environment for your team to work in, then you get to retain your staff at a higher level and engage your staff at a higher level. I was talking to another client recently, and he said his both cases, one she spoke about how her mentor really saw potential in her, really nurtured her, developed her, and really engaged her in her work. The same with the other person. And again, why? Because your quality of work life is related to what I call three things, the three R's: the relationships, the roles, and the rewards. And relationships, people work for people. That's key. So what are some of the other impacts on leadership and why it's important? Well, you're seeing more dissatisfaction in the workforce. You're seeing more stress in the workforce. You're seeing less tenure. You're seeing more change. The fact that you'll have 10 different jobs and 3 different careers before you retire. Those are all related to leading yourself or leading the market and being, in this sense, controlling the things you have control over. And one of the things I'd suggest that leaders understand is, they understand what you can control and what you can't control. And you might say, well, I'm in the middle sense of this, and there's a great research project by Harvard showing that, again, that 35 to 50 or 55, 54-year-olds, which is about where our clients make up a majority of what the work we do, is the mid-level professionals, really our focus. And again, we see this, that people feeling challenged with this. And this is, again, why leadership is so important, because if you can engage, be on the flip side of these things, it's so much more better for you and for the people you work with. What are some of the myths around this? Well, some of the myths around being a good leader: one, there's a magic bullet. How many of you have done some sort of what color are you, or Myers-Briggs type of personality? Put up your hands, those of you that have done something around that, where you've done a Myers-Briggs or a personality test. Yeah. So again, that there's some sort of magic bullet. If I just know, what color I am as a leader, or what, disc or something like that. Again, I'm not against those tools. I think they're valuable, but that there's going to be some magic bullet that enables you to be a better leader. Now, I think it's, you need to lead in a style that is related to you and how your strength is. Another magic around is you'll have a lot of pressure. I'll see people say, I don't know if I want to be a leader because there's a lot of pressure. Now, again, there is a lot of pressure in the role, but again, I think if you can manage yourself more effectively, you'll have less pressure. Another myth as a leader is that reinvention is a new idea, or the concept of reinvention as an idea. And in fact, if you look at the etymology or the root word of reinvent, it means to go back to the original place. And again, if you look at what RIM is doing right now, which is, I would admire them, and their turnaround plan is to go back to what their core strengths are and reinvent themselves. And again, that's what a leader does. A good leader reinvents the company. So just like Steve Jobs did with reinventing Apple, is he reminded them of where their strengths were and where their capacity was, and focused on that. Another myth around this: you should know how to lead. And I saw that as a recruiter, an executive recruiter for many years, where you would, a person would be promoted or would be recruited into a new job who was, let's say, a very strong technology expert, but it had not led large teams before. And there's sort of an expectation that because they're really strong in an area, that they would just be a really good leader, and now that they take on a bigger scope. And I think it's much like, it's a myth to think that you would understand how to scuba dive, right? That you would just naturally know how to scuba dive, when in fact, my son learned how to scuba dive, and he took a course, right? So that idea of that. The other myth around this, you should be able to do it by yourself. I think this is one of the great examples. If people say, oh, leaders it's lonely at the top. You know what? Smart leaders are not lonely at the top. Smart leaders know and have advisors around them and have support mechanisms in place. Even relationally, there's a book called Good to Great, and one of the examples they looked at as great leaders is that a lot of great leaders are actually on their first marriage. So again, that they were very good relationally and had good connections with people. Another myth around this is should be comfortable. I think as a leader, if your company and your organization is too comfortable, then you run into problems. And I think that's example classically what happened with RIM. That they became comfortable in their success, and that became a problem. And there's this fine balance of that. Another myth around leadership, it's complicated. Well, I think it's complex, but not complicated. Another myth around leadership is that if you give information to people, that they'll be motivated. And it's interesting if you look at the research around this, around facts and motivation, that there's a lot of research to support that even when we given facts that we will resist them often. So again, smart leaders will not only use facts, but we use emotion, both. And people are persuaded as leadership by facts and feelings. So it's really important, and good leaders understand that. Another thing that I think is a myth is that you can motivate people by fear, and you'll see this. Fear is an outstanding short-term motivator. It's a terrible long-term motivator. You see this in coaches that will come in and turn around a team for 1 year or 2 years and then kind of burn their team out, right? Another myth around this is that you'll find balance. I think what is important is you won't always be in balance, but you do have to understand how to figure out what your needs are and how to integrate those with all the other demands in your life, your personal demands, the different people you work with. And that's what we mean by balance. It's not necessarily that you'll be working in a situation where you have kind of work-life balance, the traditional mode, but it's work-life, what I call integration. Another myth around this is that good leaders follow the rules. Good leaders actually do not follow the rules. I'm not talking about moral, ethical rules, by the way. I'm talking about that they look for ways and think around the rules and are innovators around the rules. And this is my dog, and we're at the dog place where there's literally nobody in this park, and we're going for a walk there, right? So again, good leaders know what rules to bend or find innovative ways around that. In fact, you see that in bureaucracies. If you've ever worked in a bureaucracy, and if you've worked in the public sector, and we do a lot of work. We have 3 divisions in our corporate practice: a public sector division, a not-for-profit division, and a private sector division. And in our public sector division, we see people who do extremely well in public sector work or navigate the rules. They understand that. So what a great leader deals with is really about dealing with change. And why I say leadership starts with you is because your ability to change and evolve as a person is the most important premise upon which to be an effective leader. That if you can evolve and change and develop and deal with that yourself is the fundamental importance in managing and building and dealing with change. That is the key. And so it's dealing with change, it's being ready for change, and one of the important elements around change, and great leaders really understand that, is they have a clear why. And the reason why is important is because you and I are all very much alike. We are motivated essentially by whys. Great leaders understand this. They don't motivate people by what or how or when and where. They start with the why. It's the foundation. When you're dealing with change, and again, I think the reason that RAM was able to change so quickly, and we'll kind of see that story play out, is because the new leader and the group truly understand that there was a really clear why, that if they didn't change their act, they weren't going to be around, right? And then the how and the what became later. Simon the Sinek, by the way, if you're interested in exploring this topic, and which is obviously part of the reason you're here today, then I encourage you to go to a TED Talk, and it's called Simon Sinek, and Start with Why. And he does a much better job than I'm going to, because I'm going to spend that time on that today, but on dealing with the why. The why. Great leaders really understand why, and if you can understand the why for this is really key. And one of my clients, senior executive of technology, smoked for many, many years. And then one day it struck her why she wanted to change. And it wasn't the typical things. Like, it wasn't money and it wasn't cancer. It was the reality one day that every time she was planning her day, she was scheduling around when she was going to take a cigarette break. So her why for quitting smoking was control. And so this is where, again, a smart leader understands when you're dealing with people is what is their why. If you want them to change, to deal with coming into work on time or whatever it might be, whatever behavioral element or whatever kind of change you're looking at in your organization, persuasion starts with the why, and this is really fundamental to key this. So what are some of the leadership threats? Well, the number one is yourself. Number two is your environment. Number three is your peers. And number four is the media. I think, again, why leadership starts with us is because, again, it's us, right? And then the environment we're in and the peers. And media, I'll just mention that, remember that what we see and read every single day is manufactured in the sense that we only see a certain element of the news. We don't see the entire picture. And this is important in the recognizing that there's incredible amount of opportunity out there right now, and smart leaders get that. So then how do you move forward? Well, really about the who. Who are you as a leader? And really honoring that. And there's really sort of different styles of leaders. So knowing who you are, what are some of the styles? Well, there's the decisive style, there's the flexible style, there's the hierarchical style, and there's the integrative style. Those are kind of the four core leadership styles. And what does that mean? Well, what it means is, as a leader, you're evolving from the decisive style right up to the integrative style. And that's where you want to head as a leader. You want to head to the point where you're integrating this and have a style that's integrative. When you're young, you're typically decisive style, fast and firm and direct. Flexible is this, little information but many options. So this is about dealing with changing situations. The hierarchical style is reams of data but one course of action, and that can often be in bureaucracy where there's reams of information, right? An integrative solution, it means integrating those things, and that's, as a leader, really where you want to move to. So what are some of the hows of being an effective leader? Well, it's very interesting. There's a survey done by Global Knowledge, and they looked at some of the biggest challenges that organizations expect to face in the coming years. And what's interesting is the top business challenges include management, leadership capacity, talent, succession management, and recruitment. So the top three things when organizations looked at their challenges for today or for tomorrow were all related to people. They weren't related to competition, finance, or business process improvement. So dealing with people is key. Now, what's interesting, how do you deal with those challenges? And again, senior leaders, what they looked at is that, one, looking for new perspectives or new areas of expertise was key. And number two was transformation in thinking and behavior. And that was both for senior leaders and for relatively frontline managers. So what do senior leaders need? What do you and I need more is a new areas, new perspectives, and a transformation in thinking was key to being a better leader. What manager and leader competencies and behaviors are viewed as having the most influence on the individual organizational performance. And here's what's interesting is, if you want to be a great leader, it's very simple. Focus on, number one, communication. Number two, execution, decision-making, and coaching and mentoring is really, and visioning and strategy. It's interesting, I noticed that humility and courage was last in their survey, which I was a little bit surprised with, because I actually think that is extremely important. I think particularly being courageous and humility. And humility says, I don't know, tell me more. Or humility says, I'm not sure where we want to go from here. What do you think? Humility says, there's an understanding that I think what RIM's case is, the leadership was not humble enough. And then, and who knows about the courage piece. And that's why I mentioned here in this slide, a good to great, then we looked at good to great leaders, one of the things that they determined in the pattern was that great leaders are typically humble and courageous. So what do you want to improve in across all leadership and all leadership behaviors? Biggest gaps were communication, coaching, mentoring, and knowledge sharing. You want to be a great leader? Focus on three things. What I call the 3 C's: communication, coaching, and content. Knowledge sharing and transfer. If you do those things, if you just focus on those three things, communication, coaching, and content, really knowing your stuff and really adding value, that's really the key to being a great leader. And again, similar study to support this is what types of learning experiences lead to the greatest improvement. So what would help leaders grow? And it was interesting that learning experiences were about reshaping or reframing patterns. So that's coaching. This is why I so believe in why organizations bring us in. You're seeing much more utilization of coaches versus workshops, because workshops are sort of one-time hit, but they don't really change underlying patterns of thinking in order to do things differently. And it's the same thing with frontline, really key. What do high-performing organizations have and low-performing organizations? Well, number one, they consider technology to be their number one future challenge. They place higher emphasis on work-life balance, and they place higher importance on coaching, mentoring, and people development. That's what organizations do. And low-performing organizations really, we really know that their leaders need the help with this. So how do you move forward as a more effective? What are some of the things to think about this as it relates to our discussion today? Well, it's really starting with what you know as a leader. Here's what I do know as leaders, that a lot of leadership, in a sense, is common sense in a way that we instinctively know, and that the knowing piece is really key as you move forward. And one of the things to know, and I see this as I mentioned earlier in the fact that we're in global environment and lots of things are happening, is in our Calgary office, I was at the airport and I saw this sign, and I was just flying out. I had been to our Edmonton office, our Calgary office, and actually our Vancouver office, and I was on my way back and flying through Calgary back to Ottawa, where I'm based, and I saw the sign: think globally, drink locally. Now, again, I'm not really much of a drinker, so I'm not putting this up because I love beer, and which is ironic because I'm Irish and I have no time for, or I don't like Guinness at all. But I think this idea that really important as a leader is to think globally, look at all the changes that are going on, pay attention to the big picture, but then again, as the survey shows, to what do you need to do this locally? What is it you need to do here and now to make changes? So think globally, drink locally. That's an important principle as sort of starting with what you know. The other thing is, I was in Ottawa picking up my daughter. She's coming back from an exchange, and I was at she was coming back from train from Montreal, which she'd flown in, and we were picking up at the airport or at the train station, and I was in the line there and saw this, again, speaking along our taxi example, saw this taxi, and I realized that this taxi driver and this cab had, was again showing leadership, was differentiating themselves in a very crowded environment. It was being themselves and packaging that in a unique way. And I think it's something you want to be thinking about in an organization, that you have a brand and that you want to be smart about that brand. I can think of a person that we did some work with a long time ago at Nortel. I did some recruitment work for him, and he ended up becoming president of one of the divisions. And one of the things that I noticed about him, whenever I walked into his office, that his office was immaculate, and that he only had one piece of paper on his office whenever I would walk in there, and that would be for the meeting we were on. And he developed, Marco Pagani was his name, and he developed an outstanding reputation within the environment as just being a guy that was on top of things. And he was very aware of his brand, his perception, not only in doing what he did, but in the way he presented himself and differentiating himself. And I think that's really important, again, really knowing your style and being very diligent in that style, very disciplined in the style. And I call that the principle, the personal branding principle, the Tim Hortons principle. The Tim Hortons is very predictable. It's not sexy, but you know exactly what you're getting. Another thing you want to be thinking about is what is it you need to be prepared? How many of you were in Scouts or Cubs or Brownies growing up? Put up your hands, those of you that were in Scouts, Cubs, or Brownies when you were growing up. Okay. Well, essentially enough, they're one of our corporate clients. And what I find fascinating is one of the things you learn. It's a tremendous example of if you want to help your kids become leaders early in life, which is important, then those types of things are excellent that way. Great at building capacity, building leadership, things like that, and building capacity in general, very strong. But also the concept of being prepared. And I think great leaders are prepared. They are prepared for what's ahead. They get training. And so this is where training and certification and coaching, all these types of things are really important. Another principle, a good manager, a good leader, is a mirror. They're very aware, self-aware. They're not consumed by themselves, but they're very aware of their strengths and weaknesses. That's one of the things I've observed about great leaders. They're very honest in their ability to know what their strengths are and really play to that, but also understand where they're not so strong and play to that. I think another thing that a leader does is they look for opportunity where they're at, and I call it hay versus hydro. One of our partners is Queens, and I was over going for a meeting there in Kingston, and I had a bit of time, and I went across the island and saw where all the windmills were, and I was struck by this farmer, and this farmer saw opportunity in different ways on their property, and that's what a leader does. They don't just look for the natural opportunity, but they literally pay attention to which way the winds are blowing and can capture that. And again, that's another principle of leadership, is they're looking for new opportunities where they are. Often the danger is to say, I'm going to get out of this because there's opportunity somewhere else, when in fact there may be an incredible opportunity looked at completely differently or slightly differently, exactly where you are in the opportunity you have. And again, look at example of Apple. Where was Apple's big opportunity? In the entertainment industry, the music industry, the content industry. Look at how much money they're making off of iTunes. And not only that, but the ability to kind of wrap that into their solution to you so that you're locked into their solution. So you're less likely to go to a sexier, funnier, faster handset, because if it's not Apple, you can't keep the content you have, right? And so to me, this is what's important, is this idea that the content, that Apple saw an opportunity that it was slightly differently, exactly where they were, that they weren't looking for something different, and I think this is really important. The thing that other leaders do is they help their employees this way. Again, I heard that twice actually today, is helping their team members and seeing opportunities with their team members and helping their employees to grow. And I always say that in our team, I always say, if we can't help our own team do what they love and love what they do, then we're not going to execute very well. I think another thing, speaking of execution, is Serrano Fimes. There's a great story of him as a leader. Again, they had been out searching, looking for stuff for a couple of years in Iraq, and one day he overheard their support group, which part of that were spies that were from the government, and one of the things that he overheard the spies saying is that, they're looking but they're not digging. And because he recognized that potentially that would go back and they might be asked to leave the country because they're not digging, he said to his crew, we better start digging. And so the next day they started digging. And within 24 hours they found one of the most important finds of the 20th century in archaeology, because they started digging. And again, I think that's the other reality of a good leader, is a good leader just gets things going, right? And that's important. Another important reality is their optimism. Optimism is a really key thing. Great leaders are optimists. They really are. Now, I think also they're what I call opportunists. So I think they're optimist opportunist, or pragmatic optimist. I love this. You're optimist, pessimist, and realist. While you guys are busy about their glass of water, I drink it, and that's an opportunist. And so I think, again, leaders, will recognize where their challenges are, but they don't get caught up in the limitations. They get caught up in where the next opportunity is. And I'm even seeing this, even we see this recently with the oil spill we have, the train, complete and utter disaster. And already, you're hearing sort of where is the opportunity here in how we want to think differently about how we move oil and things like that. So the pipeline, recognizing that, right? I think another important thing is great leaders are being very connected, and this is something you want to be thinking about, what your network is inside your organization, around your organization, what volunteer organizations you're involved in, what boards are you involved with. That is really important. Same thing with technology, thinking about your own brand and having visibility and thinking three-dimensionally is really important. I think also great leaders know when enough is not enough, both for themselves and for their team, when to push and when to back off, and that's really key. As far as in general, I think the other thing that I've seen is that great leaders also create space in their life for other dimensions. And this is, I was in Toronto at our Toronto office, and I was down in the beaches and was going for a run, and I saw this guy, literally blowing bubbles on the beach, and another person kayaking. And again, I think, as a leader, what are you doing to have other interests in your life, to be more interesting and to have things that are completely not work related? Really, really important to make you a healthier, more rounded, more grounded person. Another thing that great leaders do, it's never too early, never too late, never too early, although it is can get more complex. I think leaders are good at this, respect. We see this consistently, which plays into this idea, which is in our little cafe beside our office in Ottawa. And I saw this sign, which I don't know why it's on the back of the register facing the customer, but it says huge welcoming smile, enthusiastic hello, genuine thank you with eye contact. And again, that's a pretty simple human human idea. And again, I think when you walk in the morning, and I saw this recently with one of our clients. I saw one of the senior executives. I was waiting to meet with one of our clients who were coaching, and I happened to see another person walk through the door, walked right by the receptionist, didn't acknowledge the receptionist, didn't say a thing to her, and just walked right through, and totally ignored her. Right. So another thing is leaders are willing to take risk and recognize that there could be failure, and will understand that. I think another thing, I was in Sudbury visiting a friend of mine who's a professor, and we were at a school. One of his kids was doing a play in, and I saw this on the stairs, and I thought about there was a whole bunch of sayings on the stairs. I thought, yeah, what really people want is wisdom and perspective. Another important principle is give people what they want, not what they think they want. This is my niece offering her dog, who's just spent the entire day in the water, right? So be careful as a leader to pay attention to what a person needs and wants versus what you think they need and want. Another important thing, it's all in how you say it. I call it another Tim Hortons example, where they, in the brewery, in their ice cream, it's the like it, love it, and gotta have it size, which is a good way to approach it. And the final idea I want to approach you is, and I think this is ultimately, you think about the C's, right? We talked about this earlier, is commitment, your content and commitment. And I think this is really key. This is in our little town where I live, just outside Ottawa, and actually on that sign, on that piece of property now, is a for sale sign. Now, why is that? Because there was no commitment to this goal. And I think, again, don't allow your team to have maybes or somewhats or maybe. Make sure your team is committed and make sure they understand what commitment means, and you're committed to that. And as Terry Rowley says, not with a bang, not with a whimper, but our own skilled hands. And this is my point about ultimately leadership starts with us. Your ability to be a great leader is all within your own skilled hands. It's not within the market or all those other things that people try to push on, or who's going to be the government or who's going to be the prime minister, or, all these sorts of things. They have marginal impacts on our overall reality. What do you have control over? So as we wrap up today, and we'll open this up for Q&A, what is one takeaway from today that you are going to implement? What is one idea from today? And maybe you could take a minute to think about that, and maybe share that if you want in the on the question box here. What is one takeaway from today that you are going to start working on to implement? What's one fresh, healthy takeaway that can help you to be a more effective and a better leader, and to really drive that? So just take a minute. I'd be curious to share that if you wish, just because it's nice for me to see what ideas stick with people or what things help people here. So what is one idea from today that you're going to implement? And that's really the key. It's the coming soon maybe idea that ultimately without a commitment to this, you're going to be challenged as a leader, and I think that's really the key is really your ability to make some decisions and to be a better leader. And how we can help you is we have a number of different ways we can help you. And these are sort of 5 things why we think we're strong: our reputation, our process, our people, our personalization, and our results. We get results. And we have a particular program called the Leadership Identity Program. So if your organization is looking for support or you're looking for support in that way, we actually have a specific program we created to help with this whole idea of nurturing and the illiteracy issue about leadership, and that's what we would help you with, is to do some one-on-one assessment. We've got some really good assessment tools. We have a really interesting methodology we've created, and some ways to really help with this. Same with you might say, oh, that's fine, I don't need help with that, but I need help with my search. And we have a 90-day search program and a transition program, student program, a professional resume search. So we have different ways that we can help you. And maybe your organization is looking for support that way. And so we would come in and talk to you and your organization about how we can help you and be a more effective leader. And a good way to start with us is to reach out to Brittany or Michelle and our team, and we can sort of get the process going with you to start with that, or to arrange a quick call with myself if you want to discuss that. And terrific. So I want to thank everyone today. If you have any specific questions or comments, so we're right on the 45-minute or just slightly over, let me know. I'd be happy to talk about that. And as I said to you, you have to really think about today. Do you want to be the person that's relying on luck and circumstances, or do you want to be like this gentleman who's got a fully booked schedule, making good money and lots of predictability and doing interesting work? And the difference is really leadership. It's not the economy, it's not the market, it's your interface into those things and how you manage that. And again, over and over again, I see smart people lead themselves and take responsibility and move forward, and great things can happen. And that's what's exciting about leadership, is the ability to create and generate opportunity and to navigate this world in a smart and way is terrific. So, all right, well, have a great day, everyone, and we look forward to helping you and our team helping you. And as I mentioned, visit our website, careerjoy.com, or you can like us on Facebook, or connect with me on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or like us on Facebook, or we have a page on Facebook, a CareerJoy page. So feel free to like us on that page and connect with us that way, or as well as on our website itself. There's many other career classes we got coming up. So our next career class is going to be on getting the right career right now. So that's upcoming, and that's coming up next week, next Wednesday, and then we have other keep looking at our events page. We constantly have new career classes coming up, new live ones. And also on our information, we have many different guides, etc., that you can download. So, all right. Well, if we can help you, or if you know of others that are looking for support in their career, then please mention our website to them, careerjoy.com, and that's how, speaking of networks, how people find out about us and how we can help you. And have a terrific day, everyone. Cheerio.